What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so before I get into this video, I want to give a shout out to the brother Aram for yet another donation to the channel via the PayPal. Much respect to him for showing love to Too Raw for TV. And he has a question. And his question was, who was the best guard in the 70s? Was it Pistol Pete? Or do you feel there was another guard that was better? Earl the Pearl? An older West? Archie Clark? Clark was underrated. Yes, he was underrated. Another guy who's underrated is Downtown Freddie Brown, with a precursor to the guards of today. Then you have the guys in the ABA you gotta look at too. So it's kind of difficult because to me, I don't think there's a real clear choice here. It depends on what you look at, and it depends on what you prefer. See, it's interesting. See, when you say guard, right, you say shooting guards. Let me make sure that's what you said. No, you said guard. So does that include point guards? Or are we just talking shooting guards? Because if we're just talking shooting guards, does that eliminate Nate Archibald, right? Because he was a point guard, even though he could score. I'm assuming that eliminates Oscar Robertson. Jerry West, even though people call him a shooting guard, he technically played point guard the majority of his career, even though he's more of a combo guard. So, how are we looking at this? So I'm just going to primarily focus on shooting guards. So yeah, the top guys that you mentioned, Archie, he wasn't top, but you mentioned Pete Maravich. Pete Maravich played pretty much the entire 70s, 1970, 1980. But as great as Pete Maravich was, you get the feeling he didn't quite live up to the expectations that people had for him out at LSU. He was tremendous, but, and he did average over 24 points a game for his career. But, sometimes you get the impression that he didn't quite live up to his potential every year. His best year was 76-77 when he led the league in scoring, 31.1 points per game. This is before the three-point line. So who knows how many points he would have averaged with three-point line? Maybe 34, 35 points per game. And I'm serious. He shot that many outside shots. He shot that many shots that would today would be three-point shots. 24, 25, 26 feet out consistently. He didn't have much playoff success. He didn't have great teams around him for the most part, except for when he was in Atlanta. There were some pretty good teams, but he didn't really mesh well with the talent on the floor. Only appeared in 26 playoff games. I think he scored 15,948 points, which at the time of his retirement was a good, decent amount, but in today's standards, it's not a huge amount of points. Matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think Stephon Marbury scored more points than him in the NBA. So, and that's not a knock on Pete. I just don't know if I could call him the best guard in the 70s. George Gervin, I would say he was the best offensive guard in the 70s. I would give him that. One, depending on how you look at it, 2 scoring titles in the 70s? two others in 1980 and 82. Won three in a row from 77, 78, 78, 79, 79, 80. And then another one, 82. Played much of his career in the ABA. When you include his ABA career, he averaged 25 points a game. The NBA career, 26 points per game. Light up. I mean, just a tremendous offensive player. Could score, finish strong at the basket. The best finger roll in the history of the game. Could finger roll from the free throw line. Yeah, such a touch. Deceptively athletic. And incredibly efficient as a scorer. And creative as a scorer. And didn't need a bunch of shots to put up points. Didn't need a whole bunch of, didn't need a whole bunch of shots. He wasn't James Harden where, James Harden had a game where he scored 50 points, but shot 11 to 38 from the floor. And I remember ESPN tried to hide it by saying, Harden, 24 at the line. Yeah, bring up his shooting from the field, though. So it kills me. We got a lot of people talk about Kobe Bryant. Oh, man, Kobe shot 17 of 37 from the floor. Okay. What did James Harden shoot? That's different. Pete wasn't a great defensive player, obviously. George Gervin was not considered a great one-on-one defender, but he was because of his hands, his hand size and his length. He was a deceptively good shot blocking guard. Archie Clark. Archie Clark definitely was underrated. Let's look at Archie Clark's numbers. Archie Clark was a point guard and a shooting guard. 16 points a game, 3 rebounds, almost 5 assists per game. 48% from the floor. 6'2", 175 pounds. 77% from the free throw line. And Archie Clark's best years, 1967 to maybe 1973. During that 6-year span, Archie Clark primarily played with the Lakers, the Sixers, and the Baltimore Bullets at the time before they moved to Washington, became the Capitol Bullets, and then the Washington Bullets. But during this time, Archie Clark averaged almost 20 points a game, 4 rebounds, over 5 assists per contest, 49% shooting from the floor, and 76% from the charity stripe. Archie Clark is a deceptively, I won't say deceptively, but definitely underrated player. Downtown Freddie Brown's another guy. Earl the Pearl Monroe. Who else? Lou Hudson, who played with Pete Maravich. Sweet Lou Hudson. Bob Dandridge played the shooting guard position. I believe he also played the small forward position, if I'm not mistaken. But you got Bob Dandridge, Paul Westphal. Oh, man, who else? Hal Greer played parts of the 70s. Walter Davis played like the second half of the 70s. Who else? Just trying to think. Doug Collins. Dave Bing was more of a small point guard. World Be Free, but he didn't play the entire 1970s. Gail Goodrich. Randy Smith, Randy Smith, but Randy Smith primarily played small forward, even though he was only 6'3" and 185 pounds. But you could consider him a shooting guard, I guess. So you had Randy Smith. Man, it's a lot of guys, man. I know I'm forgetting people. In the ABA, you had like Charlie Scott, who I believe had the highest scoring average for a season in ABA history. Then you have the Roger Brown. Many people consider him the greatest player in Indiana Pacers history, including Reggie Miller. And I'm not going to argue with that. Let's see. David Thompson. And like I said, I'm trying to go through like people who, in my mind, people who are guards. Like primarily like you would consider shooting guards. Hell, I guess you would bring up maybe, well, see, he didn't really come of age yet. So I can't bring up Michael Cooper. But I will bring up Dennis Johnson because he was Finals MVP in '79. So you got Dennis Johnson. Gus Williams was really a point guard. So I'll say Dennis Johnson in the mix. You know, there's one guy that I want to bring up, man, to say he was the best guard, but he was technically a point guard. But when people ask me, like, if people ask me, okay, if you're being technical about it, you ask me who the best shooting guard of the '70s was. Man, it's hard to say, but you kind of want to say, man, maybe Earl the Pearl Monroe because of the two championships. The two championships of unselfishness, you know what I'm saying? He proved to be effective on both ends of the floor. He was able to fit into the Knicks offense, a team-orientated offense, which a lot of people thought he wouldn't be able to do. Because the knock on black players back then was, oh, these guys are hot dogs, they only care about themselves and their numbers and all that. And while he did struggle a little bit that first year, ultimately it was a great, great move. If you want to include the entire decade, then you might have to go with Pete Maravich. I mean, his career literally incorporated the entire decade. And he scored those 16,000 points in that entire decade. Whereas other players sort of peaked later on in the decade or they retired halfway through the decade. So, if you want to look at it like that, then you got to go with Pete Maravich. You can also, if you include the ABA, you could go with George Gervin. But for me, if you're saying guards and you're including point guards with that, point guards and shooting guards, then no doubt about it in my mind, I got to go with the very underrated Walt Frazier. I got to go with Walt Frazier. Walt Frazier to me he was the best. He was clutch. He was a great defensive player. He had a great mid-range game. He could score in the post. He had a great range for the era that he played in. He was a big guard. He could facilitate. He was he was actually a great rebounder for his position. He could score. Like I said already, he was efficient. He really didn't have any weaknesses in his game for the era that he played in. There was no three-point line, except for that very last year he played. So he didn't really have weaknesses for that position. He was big. Now, he wasn't the greatest athlete. And he had this really difficult to block, from remember highlights, he had this really difficult to block jumper. It kind of reminded you a little bit of like Clyde Drexler. Not Clyde used to shoot, and he used to kind of hang in the air a little bit. Clyde was like that, man, especially in his prime. Then he got the two championships with Clyde Drexler. Then many people feel like, look, man, the guy should have at least been considered co-MVP in 1970 unofficially. Because everybody remembers Willis Reed, but the guy had arguably the best game of his career in a moment when they needed it the most, excuse me. When the Knicks organization and when Knicks fans needed that type of performance from a guy to fill in for Willis Reed, he goes out there and wills himself to a 36-point, 7 rebound, 19 assists, 6 steal performance. They didn't officially count steals, but if you look at the game, he had 6 damn steals. Contrast that to what John Starks did when they needed him to put up the best performance in the game 7. 2 for 18, 0 for 11 from downtown. So that's my official answer to this, man. Just my opinion. If you're going with shooting guards, you could go with Pete Maravich, maybe, or George Gervin. But if you're going with guards and you're including the position in general, point guards and shooting guards, no doubt about it, I have to go with Walt Clyde Frazier. But that's just my opinion. Tell me what you guys think.